Oh yeah. I think it's a little loud. I'll test them all right now. Great. Yourself?
You guys select the order in which you see. Okay. Okay. In a few minutes, which is what it's Where's water? Always looking to post different. And then it has allowed us to do it.
That's the first thing. So that allows us to see you.
Hello.
One, two, testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2. Testing. Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2.
I see your face. I see your face, so I kind of feel like I know you already. I'm Ruben Cortez. Pleasure to
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hello, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2.
Get us we go. Hey, I like this. Hey, lucky charm. Lucky chair. You want to go to the front? Let me show you where. Just keep your number.
I mean, I would.
You do? That's Diane? Day by day. Yeah.
Microphones are coming out and I know something always happens.
There we are.
What he said, well, I took his pen and then.
Are you gonna take questions?
So, who's the part that is? See everybody to make it. So you want to know what this
Does it script you have the whole thing, or does it jump to that part?
It's highlighted. So there's space, and then if not, there's the other one.
Thanks for that.
Can you highlight that? I'm making me second guess myself.
I think so. I'm just gonna go live. Is that what you say?
Don't get in your way. Don't get. He doesn't want a video of your head. These are higher. You don't have to worry. This is lower. You might get a lot of things. No.
Yeah, you want to do that?
Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start this. We're kind of looking in the lobby, make sure no one's out there, nobody's in here. I want to welcome each and every single one of you today. My name is Javier De Leon. I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Chamber of Harlingen, and we are extremely excited for each and every single one of you being here today. You know, I know there's a lot of things that are going on, and everybody's so busy in their lives, but to see each and every one of you here just means that each and every single one of you is concerned about the future of this great region that we live in the state of Texas and the whole United States. You know, we are extremely honored to have four great distinguished individuals sitting in this panel. You know, I'm fortunate to know almost every single one of them, and I can tell you every single one of these individuals are rock stars, and we're just very blessed. Thank you, candidates, for being here this evening. It really means a lot, and so we partnered with Reach for Texas, Raise Your Hands to Texas. I'm sorry, Giovanni, and really Giovanni's been doing a fantastic job and been a big part of this. So without further ado, Giovanni's going to go and give you some of the details, some of the information. But again, thank you for being here, and thank you for listening to the great things that our candidates are going to say this evening. Candidates, again, welcome to the Chamber of Commerce. This is your home community. This is your home. Thank you.
All right. My name is Giovanni Escobedo, and I'm the South Texas Regional Director of Advocacy for Raise Your Hand Texas. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the For the Future Candidate Forum for House District 37. The Raise Your Hand Texas is excited to host this conversation across the state ahead of the 2022 primary. The goal of this event is for the community to hear from the candidates directly on issues that are important to our teachers, to our students, to our parents, and to the community. I would like to thank the candidates for making the time to be here with us tonight, and for making the time out of the campaign to be here tonight. However, we know that the issues of the hearts and minds of the residents, we do have some cards for questions on the seats next to your agenda. If we have time at the end, we would like to take some questions for the audience. If not, we'll make sure to collect those questions and share the questions with the candidates and see if they choose to respond to you. We'll put your email so they can send you a quick response after the forum. We hope that after the forum, there's some time for the candidates to connect with the audience. So please do stay here for a little bit. And with that in mind, let's just get started with our rules before we pass it over to our moderator tonight. For our candidates, we ask that you please respond directly to the content matter in each question, and to direct your answers only to the moderator, and to not engage your fellow candidates. Do not call your fellow candidates by name or make comments on their previous statements, votes, or experiences. We want to use our time to allow those present here with us and those joining us online to learn by you, not by your opponents. Do not interrupt each other when you're giving your responses. We want to hear from everyone. We have a time of 2 minutes for each a question. We have our timekeeper in the front. He will raise the yellow card with 30 seconds and the red card with a minute. If the moderator feels that any candidate is not respecting these rules, he will interrupt them and redirect the conversation to the question at hand. And for our audience, we ask that you maintain an atmosphere of respect. Please refrain from applauding or any other expression of approval or disapproval during the question and answer period. We will show our appreciation to the candidate at the end. Do not attempt to distribute any campaign materials in this room. There's a table outside if anyone wants to distribute campaign materials. And we also welcome your tweets and messages on Facebook. So in your agenda, there's some hashtags at the end, and you can just tag us at the end. Raise your hand, Texas. Raise your hand, Texas. South Texas. Using the hashtags for the future, Texas Ed or Texas. And with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight. Tonight we have is the CBS 4 and NBC 23 journalist Adam Cordona, who will be moderating the questions tonight. And I'll just pass the microphone to Adam so you can introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good evening. And this is a good time to let your claps out, your voice. You're not going to be able to do it during the session. But I wanted to say thank you to Giovanni and Raise Your Hand Texas for the opportunity to be here as a moderator today. Thank you to these candidates up here as well for being here in the Harlingen Chamber of Commerce. So I am a reporter for NBC 23 and CBS 4, so it's for both stations. I saw a boo over there, that's good. So you can catch me on the news, from 4, 5, 6, and 6:30 since we're on both stations. We like to highlight our community, and I love doing community-based stories. I am from the Valley, born and raised, and I've been here all my life. So it's great to be able to be a moderator here today in home. We'll go ahead and get started here. We're going to get right into the questions, and we're going to start with Mr. Ruben Cortez. Please take up to 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family's experience with Texas public schools.
So, thank you to Raise Your Hand Texas and the moderators tonight having this event. I'm Ruben Cortez. I have the honor and privilege of representing this region already on the Texas Board of Education. I've been on the Board of Education for the last 10 years, representing every school district in the state of Texas. And more importantly, every one of the over 5.5 million students in the state of Texas. All right. Can everybody hear me now? I apologize. Like I was saying, I'm Ruben Cortez. I have the honor and the privilege of serving already on the Texas Board of Education. I've been on the Board of Education for the last 10 years. I represent all of the Rio Grande Valley, the Coastal Bend, and the Crossroads section of Texas. And more importantly, I represent every one of the over 5.5 million students in our Texas public schools. I've been married 22 years. 23 this summer. I have 4 children, 3 daughters, one who's a senior at UTSA, a junior at St. Mary's University, a junior in high school, and a son who is tall as Steve, and he's 13 years old. I'm not sure how that happened. And we have 4 dogs, 1 that we bought and 3 that we've rescued. And so we have a very busy and active life. I'm one of the candidates running for this office because I believe this region needs somebody who's going to be ready on day one to tackle the mountain of challenges that we face. As you asked about public education and how it has served me, I tell people that part of my story is, I'm very fortunate to be in a position of leadership. As someone whose story is not very different from some of those who have had a troubled history. I was fortunate to grow up in a home where I had a mother and father who loved me very much. Do I get the extra time from the technical difficulties? Sure. My apologies. I'm not sure how to proceed. I haven't seen this happen either. But you know, I'll wait.
All right, thank
I'll
you.
add it into my next question.
Let me let candidates, if you can, please press the button when you speak and press it when you're not speaking. So, Mr. Cortez, if you can push the button to turn off your speaker. All right, thank you so much, Mr. Cortez. Mr. George Rivera, please take up to 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family's experience with Texas Public Schools.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having this wonderful event, and thank you for inviting me. My name is George Rivera, and I am the Republican candidate for the Texas House of Representatives, District 37. My wife Sylvia and I live in the great city of Palm Valley, which is just west of Harlingen. Probably Harlingen has already circled us around, but it's okay. We're still a thriving community, and we're proud to be called a city. I have had the honor of being elected mayor in 2015, and I have served as mayor for the past 7 years. And I had a wonderful experience as being mayor for the city of Palm Valley. I have also worked with all the small cities in the entire district, to include Hidalgo, Willacy, and of course Cameron. So I know every single mayor in the district, so I have had the honor of working with them as well. I'm an Air Force veteran, and my two daughters are graduated from college and have had a successful career on their own. One lives in Houston, one lives in San Antonio. They're raising my 6 grandchildren, which I adore more than one that I adore my daughters. And you grandparents know what I'm talking about. I have 30 seconds to just say the last part of my thing is basically I am honored to be here, and I'm honored to represent the great district of District 37. Thank you.
Press the button, please. All right, thank you. Now, for our next candidate, Mr. Villarreal, please take up to 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family's experience with Texas Public Schools.
I want to thank you all for coming here today. It's important for you to hear from your candidates. Originally, this was actually going to be hosted in Brownsville, so I want to thank the chamber director for taking an active role in making sure this is hosted inside the district, where people can actually come and attend to hear these issues. My experience with public education is life-changing. You know, as a kid, my first language was Spanish. I was classified as an ESL student. I was taught, and I'm dyslexic as well. And actually, I even went to something called CMC when I was a young child. So teachers really helped me become who I am today. I had a disadvantage. I couldn't spell, I confused my EDs, and all those little things that make life difficult. I remember I would hate spelling tests. And if it wasn't for the hard work of teachers, specifically one teacher, actually I remember him very well, Mr. Lawrence, he was in Vela, an English teacher. And he talked to me, telling me, you know, you're lazy because, you know, they're helping you and you could do better. He pushed me every day. And actually, he made the move and convinced my parents to take me out of ESL because he says, you know, we're being lazy, but you can do it on your own. And after he did that, I really flourished. You know, I became more attentive and I worked harder. So I know the effect teachers do to make your life better. I understand teachers are vital. And if a teacher gives up on you, they will never do that for you. You know, if it wasn't for Mr. Lawrence, and I have a lot of great teachers, a lot. But if it wasn't for that gentleman, I don't think I would be here today. Thanks to him, I got accepted to UTRGV, got my 2 bachelors, and I got my master's. Education made me who I am, and we need to make sure that the individuals who educate our children, ourselves, are properly compensated and taken care of. So thank you all for coming here today.
Thank you, Mr. Villarreal. Mr. Frank Puente, please take up to 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family's experience with Texas Public Schools.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Javier and Giovanni, for hosting this. And thank you, each and every one of you all for being here, taking the time out of your busy schedules. Again, my name is Frank Puente. I am also running for State Representative District 37. I am a proud father of a 13-year-old, Frank III. And I am currently serving as a city commissioner here in Harlingen. Been on there for 3 years, and proud to say that we've gotten a lot done and a lot of progress, and projects projects that are going on in the city of Harlingen and the region. I'm a product of the school district here in Harlingen. Attended Zavala Austin Elementary, Gay Junior High, which is now Memorial, and I graduated from high school in 1981. And I will tell you the two best teachers that I've ever had are sitting in this room, and those are my parents, Mr. Frank and Tina Puente. So I'm very proud that I had a chance to learn a lot from them. I ended up going on to the University of Texas Pan American I've got a degree in psychology, and I am a proud owner and CEO, and took over my dad's company. I own a roofing company, Puente Roofing Contractors, and got a lot of good work ethic from that I was taught in the school district growing up here in Harlingen. So I just wanted to say thank you all again for having me here, and thank you for all the candidates who showed up. I couldn't be proud of it. I'm definitely amongst a good group of good candidates, so the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Puente. Now we'll begin with our statewide candidate questions. I'll alternate posing questions among our candidates. They'll have 2 minutes to each respond. Our first question relates to learning loss and the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic created massive challenges in our public schools. The rapid shift to remote learning, student enrollment decline, academic learning loss, social and emotional needs, and teacher and staffing shortages will have an impact on our schools for years to come. Mr. Villarreal, you'll start us off. What should the state's role be in helping schools meet this challenge?
The state, as we all know, provides funding formulas to ensure that our states get some measure of fair allotment. Obviously, there's many arguments to say that those formulas are not very well supported through the formulation by standardized testing and across the board. But the state should be there to listen to the local school board and the students, because in reality, sometimes people argue that school boards are disconnected from the family and the members in the classroom. You know, as a state legislator, we need to listen to our teachers, we need to listen to our administrators, we need to know what they need, provide the funding that they require for after school programs. Senate 21, GEAR Up, those who come through the federal government, as we all know, provide grants to provide after school meals. It's important to ensure, and this is something that has been working on for a long time, that our students are properly fed and taken care of. There's a lot of issues that we have in today's society, but it's difficult for a family member to always be there helping their student do the homework. As you know, now we have two member working households, or single mother working households, or single father working households. And that puts a crimp on what they are able to do for the student. As a state legislator, I want to make sure that the school districts get what they need, and that's why having an open line of communication with your local school board members and your local teachers is vital, so that as the progress goes on, we make sure that we modify our services as a state to ensure they have the proper equipment that they need, the proper education, and let's not forget teacher continuing education as well. We need to also make sure that we limit barriers for teachers to get into the classroom. As you all know, in a public school, at least in a regular public school, teachers need to be certified before they get into the classroom. Before, they were able to be in the classroom and after 3 years get their certification. That limits our ability to put teachers in the classrooms in front of the students to ensure that they're given proper education. I think that's something that needs to be reverted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera.
There's no question that every school in our community suffered some great challenges during this pandemic. We have to commend our teachers, our administrators, our custodians, our cafeteria workers for answering the call and coming to the aid of our children. The role of our state is to find we have to continue to set high expectations and to provide the resources to provide a proper education for our students. We also have to work with each and individual school district so that we could find the critical needs that we need to improve in those critical needs. And also, we cannot operate on the Rodecito syndrome. We have so much at stake in our classroom that we have to find a way to move on forward beyond this past 22 months that we all suffered. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and repeat the question again. The COVID-19 pandemic created massive challenges in our public schools. The rapid shift to remote learning, student enrollment decline, academic learning loss, social and emotional needs, and teacher and staffing shortages will have an impact on our schools for years to come. What should the state's role be in helping schools meet this challenge? Mr. Puente.
Sure. I think the answer is pretty simple. What we need to do is we need to listen to our teachers and administrators and ask them what they want. They're the ones that are at the forefront of our classrooms and dealing with our kids. And having to go through this pandemic has taken its toll on a lot of the teachers. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of them leave these positions for better pay, better positions. And so, as I said before, I own a roofing company, and I feel that I am been successful because I listen to what the customers need, and more importantly, I listen to what my employees need. They're the ones who can tell me what they need. And so, like the teachers and administrators, we need to ask them what they want. I'm a construction owner, I'm not a politician. I don't need to listen to lobbyists. We need to listen to what our teachers and the parents, to what they need, find out what their needs and what they need to be successful in the classrooms. I find it interesting that we've spent billions of dollars on border walls and DPS out along the border, National Guard, and I think some of those funds should be shifted over to our teachers and our administrators. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cortez.
There you go. So I think the first thing we need to do is address teacher shortage. I've talked to superintendents who are actually filling in classrooms right now. This is how bad it is. Even here in Harlingen, the teacher shortage is a big problem that needs to be addressed. Our teachers have been our heroes throughout this pandemic. They've put themselves at the front lines to educate our kids. They're overstressed and overburdened, and I don't blame them. I mean, we need to do more for them. As a member of the Board of Education, this is something that we've been working on. One of the other issues that's about to come up that we've been dealing with, and I've already sent a letter to Commissioner Morath and Governor Abbott asking for attendance waivers. You have school districts like across the Rio Grande Valley that have attendance rates in the 70-something percentile, right? Even districts here in Harlingen are at the 80th percentile, right? And what does that mean? At the end of the year, the state's going to want to settle up and say, hey, you didn't have all your attendance, you need to send money back. The biennium's already been funded. We shouldn't be sending the money back. We should be using it to address the learning loss issues that are occurring, whether that's paying for extra tutors, extra Saturday academies, giving teachers the well-deserved breaks that they need. These are the types of things that we need to be attacking. On the State Board of Education, we just updated the dyslexia handbook. We did it in a way where it would help us identify more students so that we can serve more students. As a father of 3 children who have dyslexia, these are important topics of how are we helping address these concerns for our students. What we have going on right now is not a massive truancy problem. We have parents who, the reality is they're still afraid to send their kids into a brick and mortar school. And the state's requiring school districts to count them absent, even though they're offering some kind of online instruction. And that's a problem that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Cortez. Our second question is about teacher workforce. Teachers, principals, and school staff are currently leaving the education professions in alarming numbers. Working conditions, pay, and other job opportunities are all factors in helping attract and retain highly effective teachers. Are we paying our teachers what they are worth? And did the legislature do enough in the 2021 session to keep teachers in the profession? Mr. Rivera, your thoughts?
Let me begin by stating that if we place a value of what our teachers have been doing, we are not placing a good acknowledging of their efforts. They have done a tremendous job these past 22 months.
The legislature has made some great strides in providing funding to attract good candidates for the teaching profession. However, we still have a long way to go. We have to increase the base pay of our teachers, and we have to find unique compensations to keep these teachers here, such as the teacher incentive allowance. It provides a framework that we can build on. But I believe it needs to be expanded so that we do not limit it to 33% of the teachers in the entire state of Texas to participate at any given time. I know this because we have more than 33% of teachers that are doing an exceptional job. And I will do everything possible to increase funding for this particular program. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Puente.
The question again is, are we paying our teachers what they're worth? And again, the simple answer is no. They're not getting paid what they deserve, and I think everybody knows that on this table. I think we all agree that they need to be paid more, and it's just a matter of finding the resources. And how do we find those resources? Well, I'm going to revert back to the last question, and I keep reverting back to my company. It's because I listen to what my employees need, I listen to what the clients need, and so what the legislators need to do is they need to listen and give an ear out more to our teachers in their profession. Did they do a good job in the legislation? I don't think they did enough. I think there could have been more, and so I feel going up to Austin, I'd be able to do that because again, I'm not a politician. I want to listen to what the teachers and administrators want, what their needs are, find the resources that they need to get the jobs that they need to. Retainage is very important. It's a simple thing to recruit teachers. The hardest part is retaining them. And why aren't we not retaining them? Well, those are the questions that I would like to know, specifically by asking and opening my door to them, asking what they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cortez, are we paying our teachers what they are worth, and did the legislature do enough in 2021 session to keep teachers in the profession?
There you go. No, we are not paying our educators enough. They are undervalued and underrespected as a profession. I mean, it comes down to something as simple as you can go work as a DPS officer for 20 years, walk away with the majority of your pay in retirement. But a teacher needs to put in 35, 36, 37, 38 years to walk out with that same level of compensation. So can we do more? Absolutely. We can fix their health care, we can adjust their salaries, we can make sure that there's going to be retirement there. We can make sure that their salaries are commensurate with the work that they're doing. Every time I get invited to go into schools, and I go into lots of schools, especially at the beginning of the year during professional development, one of the things I talk about is what happened to me. If not for my mother's prayers, my counselor, and 3 very specific teachers, I tell them when I go into the building, if not for that, I should be dead or in jail. Because of all of the dumb things that I did growing up, because of the circumstances in my life. And educators don't know the impact that they have on kids. But I can tell you today that 3 very specific teachers, my counselor and my mother's prayers, if not for them, I wouldn't be sitting up here in this panel. I wouldn't be in Austin making decisions for 5.5 million students today. And so I understand the hard work that our educators go through. I'm married to an educator. My wife's an elementary principal. She's a lifelong educator. And so I understand the challenges that they face. And as a state, we need to do better to show them and give them the respect that they deserve. And when it comes to our retirees, they shouldn't be begging for scraps and asking for a 13th check. We need to make a permanent cost of living adjustment. Not something that has to be brought up every legislative session. It needs to become permanent.
Thank you. Mr. Villarreal.
Thank you. Obviously, the answer answers itself. People are leaving the profession. There's a reason for that. salary is number one. Somebody works to be properly compensated. That's not currently happening right now. If we compare a teacher to a nurse or any other, an attorney, they're not properly compensated. Nowadays, based on the curriculum and teaching plans and special education courses requirements, teachers do the same amount of paperwork an attorney does, but they only make $200 a day compared to an attorney who goes $200 an hour. And they don't have additional staff support. You know, the teaching profession is no longer about teaching. It's teaching and the substantial amount of paperwork now required to keep with compliance. That's number one. Number two, obviously, retirement is vital. How can we expect somebody to go into a profession if their benefits are not up to par? Fringe benefits are vital. And I apply for any job, that's the first thing you look at, right? How can it be that our teachers are leaving the profession and, like it was previously stated, they do not have a proper adjustment cost of living index every year based tied to their retirement? As we all know, inflation keeps going up, but retired teachers keep making the same amount of money. And thirdly of all, actually, if we look at teacher, and this may be a little bit far in comparison, but we look at a nurse, they are in front lines. You do not know if one of these child, to no problem, are COVID, and they found out later. It is important to ensure that the teachers have proper health plans that covers them and provides them with all the medical services and needs that they need. They're in the front lines every day, risking their lives, teaching our children. Because you don't know, COVID affects each one of us differently. Some of us with very light symptoms, some of us end up in the hospital. That's the same for teachers. So we need to ensure that three things happen. We make sure we pay them better. We make sure that we reduce the amount of paperwork they have to do, and that we have the proper medical services they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Villarreal. Our next two questions relate to assessment and accountability. Texas administers a comprehensive high-stakes testing and accountability system that assigns an A through F grade to each campus and district, which can trigger sanctions that have closed schools and replaced elected school boards. Do you think STAR and end-of-course tests are telling us everything we need to know about a student's ability to succeed in college and the workforce? Mr. Puente, your thoughts?
I personally don't believe in any kind of standardized testing. I think it takes away from the full potential of each child and their ability and their skills. Having to force children or kids or even college entry tests puts too much pressure, and I think it's wrong. There's a lot of CEOs and in the Fortune 500 who have never taken the STAR test, but yet they've become very successful entrepreneurs. And there's some that never even, graduated from high school, went to college, but they had the foresight and ability to become very successful. So I think that specifically the STAR should be at least minimized or just eliminated, because I think we need to leave this up to our teachers. They're the ones who are in the classrooms. They're the ones who interact with the other teachers and the parents, and so they're the ones who are teaching. Let them do what they need to do. I'm sure that a lot of our legislators never had to take the STAR test, but yet they're very successful business men and women. They're successful legislators. Even our own governor, who's done a good job, has never had to take the STAR test. So why do we want to pressure our children to do the same thing when that doesn't show their true abilities? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cortez?
Yeah, so, our teachers and our students spend way too much time preparing for one test. If any of you know me, you know that I've made no secret of the fact that I'm not a fan of standardized testing. To the point where just last month, I called on Commissioner of Education Mike Morat to actually cancel the administration of STAR for this year. With the amount of students that are out, with the amount of substitute teachers that are in our schools teaching our kids, unfortunately, the level and quality of education that they're receiving at this moment has decreased at some extent, which is why we're talking about learning loss, right? Because learning loss is a real thing that we got to get a handle on. I understand diagnostic tools have a place, but one test that is the end all be all is not the way to go about it. There has to be other ways, maybe student portfolios. Right now, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a STAR exam. That money can be spent in our schools for our teachers, right? But it's not just the grading of the writing portion of the test. We spend tens of millions of dollars to grade that. And I've always questioned the state's ability and how they take this test and how they grade it, because they'll send it out to a third-party group, whether it's a retired teacher or a college student, to grade this writing assessment, when they should give it to the teacher that's with this student, who's been there all year long, who understands how that student has progressed, but they don't do them. Instead, they're spending tens of millions of dollars to third-party groups to do these assessments, when we should be giving that money to our teachers who are with our students, right? And so these are some of the problems, some of the unintended consequences of having STAR exams, and that's why I'm just not in favor of standardized tests.
Thank you. Mr. Villarreal, do you think STAR and end-of-course tests are telling us everything we need to know about a student's ability to succeed in college and the workforce?
So I'm probably the only one here that can say that took a standardized test. So I'll start with that. I'll tell you I was a poor test taker, something that I grew out of. I've been a very successful businessman, graduated with 2 bachelor's and a master's, and the test always had me in the lowest percentile. You know, that is not an indicator of performance. The reason why is because there's people who are nervous test takers that eventually you grow out of. You grow into your skin, you're able to perform better. Like I mentioned, Mr. Lawrence, one of the reasons that I was able to overcome that. Additional to that, you know, a test is a snapshot in a certain time frame. You know, there's other standards that can be used to quantify this, like the student's overall grades throughout the school year. You know, the teacher teaches the student for 9 months. They have a face-to-face interaction with the student. They teach them. They know their disabilities. They know their abilities. And I think the teacher is the most qualified to quantify those results, because they have that interaction daily. You know, a student may be sick the day of the test. A student may be nervous the day of the test. An incident may happen at home the day of the test. You know, there's many factors that leads to the results that may not be the best result for the students. I think a snapshot of the student's performance over a long period of time will be better. Did they go to college? Did they graduate from college? And look at the percentage of their schools to quantify their performance. Not this one snapshot of one period of time, because, you know, there's just bad days. Everybody has them. And that may be the student's bad day. Not only that, it affects the school overall. Schools are graded based on standardized tests. So, based on, and teachers as well. So it creates a cycle of issues. So I think standardized tests are not a good, quantified, and measurable student performance.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera.
I do not believe that state assessments drive a good picture of what the schools and or the districts are doing at that present time. A test or an assessment is just a snapshot in the moment in that time. We cannot evaluate a student or a school with just a snapshot in that time. Assessments are supposed to be an instructional tool that the teachers use to know or to find out when a student's learning is not at its maximum potential. The teachers will use that data to change their ways of teaching to maximize and optimize the learning experience of the students. As far as accountability, parents need to know how and what the schools are doing. However, an assessment is not a tool for the parent to really understand what the school district and what the school is doing at that present time. This is why it's important to communicate all the good things that the school districts and the schools in particular are doing at that present time, and communicate that very well so they could properly assess what each school in which the school district is doing. at that particular time. And I see the 30 seconds, and that's I can't go to the other items, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, our current A through F accountability system is entirely based on STAR to rate our schools at the elementary and middle school levels. Should our accountability system be so dependent on a standardized test, are there other factors of school quality we should consider? Mr. Cortez, your thoughts?
So accountability shouldn't be based on high stakes tests. Accountability shouldn't be based on high stakes tests, period. The A through F system is a failed experiment. You know, I think, you know, to be able to do that and accurately reflect what is happening in a school, I think it's a bad way of doing things. Because if you took a child out of the school district in Harlingen and put them in a school district in Austin, well, if you took any of us and we're students in Harlingen CIC and we moved to Austin, well, we're worth more money in Austin as children just by the zip code that we live in. So they're already getting more money to do the same work that we're expected to do here. So to use an A through F system for something like that isn't a fair way to do it. There are so many inequities and disparities that exist within the funding of public education that an A through F system just inherently isn't going to work until we fix the school finance system to begin with, right? That's the only way that we'll be able to go back and say, okay, well, let's figure out a true metrics for evaluating our school systems, and the A through F system is not the right way to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Villarreal.
Like I previously stated in my previous question, this is not a fair measure to standardize performance of a school or student. As we know, the teacher is the best way to measure a student's performance. You know, they are there for 9 months teaching the student, ensuring that they're learning what they need to, and avoiding all, and specifically addressing all the specific issues they have. That's why a teacher is so vital. So when we're looking at performance, we need to look at school and children's performance. We need to look at the grades over the 9-month period that they're there in school. That's number one. But when you look at the performance overall, did they go to college? Did they graduate from college? Number one. Number two, did they go into a technical training school? Did they get a certificate? There are many more quantifiable pieces of data that could be used. Because if we're just looking at this test, it is not a fair way of judging an entire school. You know, we also need to look at where the school is located. There's economically disadvantaged areas where students have a harder time performing because at times the parents are busy working, you know, and they don't have time to sit down with the student or with the children and be like, we need to learn this and focus on this. I was very blessed that I have a mother at home. But how many students today have a mother at home that will sit there with a child and go section by section? Not many. And the teacher is stepping up. Actually, doesn't need to. They're stepping up and doing this already. However, we're not all able to perform at the same level, and that's why we need to look at the overall performance. Because a test is not a quantifiable tool. It is a tool to tell us where the child is lacking and where the teacher may want to address more as the class overall, but not a way to measure performance in the long term, especially not performance of the school for funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Should our accountability system be so dependent on a standardized test? Are there other factors of school quality we should consider?
As I mentioned earlier, we cannot completely define the results or the Can I continue? I'm sorry. As I mentioned earlier, schools cannot be completely defined by the snapshot of the moment in time. A better system of defining our schools are items such as what experiences beyond the curriculum are schools providing that help students understand the world around them and expose them to real life situations. Are students prepared for the post-secondary education? Are they graduating with value-added secondary value-added high school diplomas that include industry certifications and dual enrollment credit hours. These are just a few items that we should be adding and to each school in each district to properly assess them and to properly advise our parents that the schools and our school districts are doing a great job for each student. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Puente.
So the basic answer is no. Accountability shouldn't set or rest on the current system that we're dealing with now, on the standardized testing. Are there other factors? Yes. It's very simple. It's our teachers. They're the ones who know what needs to be taught. They're the ones that know how to teach. They're the ones that have to deal with the children on a one-to-one basis. So the simple answer is let's go back to basics. Your basic English, math, science. Let's go back to the basics and let the teachers do their job along with parent involvement and homework. They're the ones at the forefront of these issues, and so accountability and testing, I just don't see it as beneficial to our students or our kids. You know, the teachers are the ones who can see each and every student individually and what their talents are, what their abilities are, and by holding them to a standardized test, I think it's just completely wrong. Let's let the teachers, for our best efforts, take care of those issues themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Now our next set of questions is about school choice. During the 2023 legislative session, we will likely see a push for greater school choice initiatives, including state funding for private schools. Do you support or oppose vouchers, which are taxpayer-funded government subsidies for private schools and vendors with no accountability for results? How do you feel about the expansion of charter schools in the state and/or your community? Mr. Rivera, your thoughts?
To start, vouchers are something that I believe is not good for our system overall. We need to consider the fact that a voucher may not cover the full admission of an individual into a private school, especially at the local private school. This will only help and benefit the few. And I believe the money, the way it's being allocated today, helps the whole. Individuals that are going to public schools are there because they need to get the education they probably need. And as we know today, they're already not getting the full amount of money that they need to properly function. As we know, teachers are leaving, and they're having issues in retainage of employees across from admin, teachers, superintendents across the board. So I think implementing vouchers would only cripple the system that's currently struggling severely in the area. I believe that charter schools are something that we have here today. I do not oppose them or support them. I do believe charter schools need to play by the same rules that public schools play by. They need to have the same reporting standards. They need to ensure that if they require you, if a public school is required to have a teacher to be certified before they enter the classroom, so do charter schools. Currently, charter schools are not required to do that. If we're going to have charter schools play with public money, they need to have the same reporting standards than any other public school in the system, because it's public money. My issue, and the only issue I have, is to make sure that accountability is there, and that every system that is receiving public money follows the same reporting guidelines, same standards, and the same mandates to ensure that kids get a fair and proper and equitable education.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera.
So you asked me the question of how I relate or how I interact with public schools at the beginning. I must tell you that I am a product of a private Catholic school education. My daughters are products of Catholic schools education. However, I do not, I repeat, I do not support vouchers. We should not siphon taxpayer dollars just for the simple reason to redirect them to private schools. However, I do believe that state has a responsibility of providing a quality education and should include a path to a quality education if a child is in a bad school or a bad school district. It is our responsibility to make sure that we provide an adequate avenue and an adequate path to that child. However, a private system that provides this publicly funded education needs to be limited to a few and be monitored closely so that we could avoid wasteful spending. So did I hear correctly that you asked the second question, number 6, at the same time about charter schools? Is that correct? So, question number 6, am I in the same time schedule here? All right, so real quickly, I am concerned with the expansion of charter schools in areas where we already have blue ribbon schools. Why are we duplicating services here? I am not against the expansion, but if charter schools are going to expand, they need to expand in areas where there's a critical need and not just pop up just anywhere they want to. I am concerned that we have charter schools that have become simply a duplication of public schools that we already have in place.
Thank you. Mr. Puente, do you support or oppose vouchers, and how do you feel about the expansion of charter schools in the state and or your community?
Okay, so I'm not a real big proponent on vouchers. I think I'm a big proponent on public schools, and I think what we should do is there should be more outreach and more marketing in our public schools on what they need. And another important thing that I feel as a parent is that we need to teach our kids how to respect our teachers and focus on learning and trying to grasp basic education. I don't really believe in the voucher system because it kind of takes away from other districts or other schools and it's not evenly funded. So I think, as some of the others have said, charter schools, I think that we're at a point where we have enough. And I think with the funding that we have, I think we should just spread it out equally to where it's fair for every child here in Texas. My son is a product of both the charter school and public schools. And I think there's good teachers in both entities. But again, let's just go back to basics and let's spread the funding evenly and equally across the state of Texas. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cortez.
I do not support vouchers. I have a track record of not supporting vouchers. 10 years on the Texas Board of Education. I've authored 2 anti-voucher resolutions that we presented for the Texas legislature that were approved by a majority of the 15-member body, the Texas Board of Education that I serve on. As it relates to charter schools, the SBOE, the board that I serve on, we have the authority under the law to veto any new charters. Charters are supposed to be about innovation, and some of them are, but not all of them, right? And so when we're talking about diluting funding from our existing public schools, there needs to be a better way on how we do this. There needs to be a better matrix on what the state allows to even be considered. Give you an example right here in the Rio Grande Valley. Just last week, I asked the Texas Education Agency to investigate one of the applicants because of some of the past allegations under the Texas Department of Health and Human Services website, the federal government Health and Human Services website, and they're asking for state dollars. I mean, these are our kids that we're talking about, right? As public officials, we need to be very worried about where these dollars go and who gets it. So we need to get a better handle on this. I've asked the Commissioner of Education to put a moratorium on new charters until we can truly identify what the funding implications are for the state of Texas. Because once a charter gets approved, they no longer need State Board of Education approval for an expansion. The Commissioner of Education can just overnight give an expansion for 10 schools to a charter system without any oversight, without any public hearing, without anybody getting any type of notice. That sort of thing shouldn't be happening. Texans deserve better, and we should have a proper oversight mechanism for
Thank you, Mr. Cortez. Our last set of questions is about school funding and state budgets. In 2021, the legislature maintained current funding levels for schools. In addition, schools received substantial federal support for learning loss, after-school programs and summer school programs, and other COVID-related funding needs, which will run out in 3 years. Have you talked to your school districts about what they're doing with their federal stimulus funds? If so, what have you found out about how they're addressing learning loss? Mr. Rivera, your thoughts?
I have, and I have learned that our schools have appropriated their resources in an effort to close the learning gaps by this terrible pandemic that we have encountered. I have also learned that our school districts have outperformed other regions in the state while serving the largest demographic boost that we have ever seen. I am pleased to see that educators here in our district have a great handle of what they need to do, and have even more impressive that they're working with the determination to educate our children in any which way that they possibly can. I also have learned that they are dealing with the air quality in our infrastructures, and I could safely tell you that they are doing everything to make sure that our institutions are not carriers of this terrible virus that we have all encountered. I am very impressed by our school districts and our school district administrators. They are doing a fantastic job. I really don't know how we are able to keep such talented individuals. But let me tell you something, we have some great superintendents in our district, and we need to make sure that they stay here because they are a great asset for our district. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Puente.
Honestly, I haven't had privy to a lot of this information, but I have had a lot of feedback from teachers and principals on some of the issues that they've had to deal with during the pandemic and the funding that they have or haven't received. Honestly, or personally, I don't think they've been compensated as much as they should. And I think what they should, we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. We're still dealing with it. And again, this reverts back to what can we do to better compensate them throughout this crisis. And so, again, this goes back to an open door policy to where I'd like more feedback from our administrators and teachers to find out what it is that they honestly and actually need, because unless we talk to them on a one-to-one basis and talk to the administrators to find out specifically what they really need and how much funding they need, and more importantly, how much compensation can we give them to service them better and make sure that they can do a quality teaching job in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cortez, have you talked to your school districts about what they're doing with their federal stimulus funds? If so, what have you found out about how they're addressing learning loss?
So yes, I speak to the superintendents of this region on a periodic basis. Besides my service on the Texas Board of Education, I also have served for the last 12 years on the Regional and Education Service Center Board, which directly represents this entire region. And so I'm in constant contact with school leaders, with school superintendents. These ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3 funds, as you mentioned, these are one-time funds. They're going to finish. And when they finish, the problems will still be around. The state of Texas needs to have a long-term mitigation strategy in place on more staffing and paying employees better wages, because teachers are leaving the profession very, very quickly because of the burnout that they're experiencing right now. As someone who's married to a public school principal, a lot of these monies that they're giving them are being spent on COVID-proofing the facility. And then the rest is being spent on tutorials, on Saturday academies, but it's not enough. It's not enough. I mean, when you hear the amounts of money that are being funneled into the school by the federal government, it sounds very impressive. But when you break it down per child and what they're able to do, it's not as much as you think. because to modify this facility and make it semi-safe for teaching, for large group gatherings, these costs are expensive. To change the ventilation system in the facility is very costly, right? And so we need to do a better job of putting better opportunities in front of educators so that we can make sure that we keep these men and women that are on the front lines taking care of our most precious commodity, our students, so that we can keep them engaged and wanting to remain in this profession, because none of us would be up here if we hadn't first been taught. None of you would be out there unless we went through some kind of an education, and we need to value our educators.
Thank you. Mr. Villarreal.
As the campaign has gone on, I've had the opportunity to meet several school board members across the district, from Harlingen Consolidated School District, San Benito, San Carlita, Raymondville, across the district. And I'll tell you this much, they're doing the best to ensure our students have a continuing education with these funds. They are spending money on sending out infrastructure so students are able to have online learning at their homes. They have invested in tablets, they have invested in infrastructure across the board to ensure that if a student can go to school, they are able to continue learning. As we all know, preview to this, access to internet is now vital more than ever. And as we all know, most of our students do not have that at home. They actually need to be at school. So a lot of that money has been spent on those specific issues. And as my counterparts have stated, on fixing and updating the schools. The ventilation system is one of the most important part when it comes to COVID. So they have been spending money on updating their facilities. They have spent money on COVID testing. They have spent money across the board. So I think that this funding is, like I said, they're temporary. So they're just spending it on one-time fixes. And it's something that obviously is not going to be a permanent fix, but there's steps that we need to take to ensure that in the future, the state and the federal government provide continual allocations of fundings to ensure that our kids and our teachers have the tools to continue teaching our students in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last question relates to assessment and accountability. The state will potentially have a budget surplus of $12 billion and another $12 billion available in the state's rainy day fund going into the next legislative session. Texas continues to be about 4,000 below the national average in per student spending. What are your funding priorities for public education in next session? Mr. Puente, your thoughts?
It's a very simple answer. We need to bring our teachers' salaries and compensate them back up to the national average. I think it's unfair that they're not, as one of the biggest states in our nation, where they're not getting paid enough or compensated enough. So, to bring, I think we're $4,000 below the national average, and that's kind of embarrassing. I think what we should do is concentrate more on how we can bring their compensation back up to at least the national average, so that way we can retain more teachers, recruit more teachers, and give them some kind of an incentive to want to teach and continue teaching. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cortez.
Yeah. We might have a $12 billion surplus, but there's also other monies that we can get. I mean, Governor Abbott's border wall, that money should be given to our schools. What we're spending on the guard, with a mission that has no end in sight. Those monies should be drawn back and utilized for our public schools. There's no doubt that we need to hire more people because there are employee shortages in every district. Right here in Harlingen, every school district in Texas is experiencing this. That's why substitute teacher pay has drastically increased, because there is such a shortage. We clearly need to pay teachers what they deserve to be compensated for the hard work that they're doing, for putting themselves in harm's way every day. With some of the schools that haven't COVID-proof because they didn't get enough funding or they didn't get enough money to COVID-proof the entire school and prioritize where they were able to. These are some of the things that we need to be able to address. We need to be able to hold districts harmless right now on attendance waivers with what's happening. And we need to just be able to do a better job of providing the resources necessary. You talked to Albert Peña, the superintendent in San Carlita. Right after we came back from the winter break, they stayed shut down for an additional week because they didn't have something as basic as a COVID test to offer to any student or employees. So they closed for an extra week. Mr. Peña called me on a Friday night, about 9 p.m. and says, Mr. Cortez, we think we're going to close a few more days. And I said, hey, you guys have been shut an extra week. What's going on? He says, sir, I don't even have a single COVID test. And I said, how is this even possible? I found the local pharmacy that went down there on Monday morning, COVID tested those who wanted to be COVID tested. That Monday morning, they were able to reopen the district. 25% of the people that tested positive. Had they not had something as basic as a test, those folks who had gone, sat in a classroom, caused a super spreader event in San Carlita ISD. These things are unacceptable and need to be.
Thank you. Mr. Villarreal, what are your funding priorities for public education next session?
Like I stated here, there's a lot of money currently sitting at the state coffers, and they need to be addressed. But more importantly, we need to fix formulas. That money could be used properly through proper formulas that quantify which schools need it more and what areas need to be addressed. Obviously, the first thing you would address is salaries. Everybody likes to say everything's bigger in Texas, but that probably doesn't translate to salaries, right? And it's important to know that, we have a workforce issue throughout the state, and that can only be fixed with educators. There's not enough qualified workers in the entire state to address our needs. There's worker shortages, and that's because there's not enough teachers who are extremely valuable to teach these students what they need to know so they can go out to the workforce field. It's important that as we go on, and as one of those gets elected to the legislature, that we address these issues and that we look not only at one-time funding. These are funds that are currently allocated through fuel tax, oil and tax gas fees, but we need to also allocate something directly to education so it's a continuing funding cycle. Not just, okay, let me add another $1 billion for this cycle and we'll address it next session, or another $1 billion another next session. We need to actually allocate some type of fee into our education mechanism so it's a continuous funding. If not, if we do is just a simple, okay, let me move a couple of billion from here to over here, it's nothing better than what's currently happening with federal funding. It's a one-time allocation. We need to make sure that the legislator that you choose to elect knows how to pass these types of legislations and know how the funding mechanism works so that you could have continuing increasing funding. Not just, oh yeah, let's move money over. It doesn't work that way. That's why you need to choose someone with experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera.
We should never lose sight of the fiduciary responsibility we have to the taxpayer of the state of Texas. We must take a conservative approach as to how we spend the money. However, we cannot use the surplus, this rainy day fund, as a trophy stating that we have all of this money saved up. Our constituents are wanting us to use these resources to address these critical shortages that we have right now. Our administrators have plans, but what good are those plans if we don't have the teachers to implement those plans? We do not need long-range plans. We need solutions right now, and we have the resources to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time for audience questions. We will collect your questions. You have those cards at your seats, and we'll provide them to our candidates after the forum. For now, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and move on to closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to share last thoughts to the audience. Mr. Rivera, would you like to start?
Yes, let me glad to start. Sorry, you took me off guard. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for listening to us. I personally do not have all the answers that we need to address our public school systems. But I think that I have a good handle, and I have been in discussions with some great people in our district that are great educators and great administrators. Probably some of the best that we have in the state of Texas. I do not have a personal agenda, as I've been telling most people. I just have a passion to help people. And you might say that, well, you're a product of a private school. Yes, I am. However, because of that, I do believe that education is what this district is needing right now. Without education, without educating our children and our families, we are losing a losing battle. We must improve our education system right here in our district. If not, we are going to continue this vicious cycle that we have been through the past 50, 60 years, if not probably all your lives combined. So please understand where I am, where I've come from, what I want to do. I am the Republican candidate for District 37, and I ask for your support, and I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Puente.
Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for being here and listening. I just wanted to go back and reiterate that I'm a product of the public school system. I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and 2 of my sisters are former educators. So I have a huge amount of respect for teachers and administrators. And like we've all said here, we need to do more for our teachers and our administration. My philosophy goes back to how I run my company, and that is I listen to what your needs are, and I produce what you need, and I get the work done and the job done to make sure that you continue to work and you continue to thrive as educators. And so, again, I'll always have that open door policy to listen to what your needs are as teachers, administrators, and more importantly, our parents and the kids. And so I too humbly ask for your vote and your support for State Representative District 37. And again, thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Puente. Mr. Cortez.
Yeah, I want to thank Raise Your Hand Texas for having this event. Raise Your Hand Texas is a tremendous organization. Does a lot of good work across the state of Texas. They're great when it comes to advocating for all public education needs for the students of the state of Texas. As I make my closing thoughts, I just want you all to understand a little bit more about me. When I got to Austin 10 years ago in the Texas Board of Education, for me it was real simple. It was about how do we keep politics out of the classroom. It was about how do we make decisions from our classroom to our boardroom and not from our boardroom to our classroom. That's something that I've lived by. I think that that's the best way to make any policy is by inviting all of those stakeholders to be part of that decision process. It's something that I've lived by for the last 10 years. If I'm blessed enough to become your next state representative, you can ask your schools. I'm there. I'm a constant presence when they need something. You may not see me in a lot of the community engagement events, but you'll see me in your school systems. Your superintendents, your board members, your administrators, they know who I am because of the advocacy that I do, the amount of effort that we've put out there, my ability to work with my Republican colleagues on the State Board of Education for the last 10 years speaks for itself, right? But I'm asking voters now, send me back to Austin, but not just to focus on our kids and our schools, but to focus on our entire communities. And I will take with me that same approach that I use now. Not make decisions from Austin and assume that I know what our community's needs are. I'm going to come down and visit with the chambers, with first responders, with healthcare professionals, with all of the organizations that are going to be impacted by the decisions that are going to be made in Austin. And together, my actions are going to be driven by the needs of our communities. That's the only way to make good, sound public policy that will help strengthen our communities. It's about fighting for our fair share. I've been doing it for public education, and now I'm asking for you to send me back to Austin so I can do it from House District 37.
Thank you, Mr. Cortez. Mr. Villarreal.
I want to thank our chamber CEO for hosting this once again. He's also a school board member here in Harlingen Consolidated School District. So thank you so much to opening up the space to raise your hand and hosting this event. I think it's very important that the local community gets to hear where we all stand on education. As a candidate, I want to say I'm probably the only one with past experience in the legislature. I worked there for 7 years. I was director of administration for a state senator. I worked through the budgetary process. My old boss was the vice chairman of education in the Senate. So I've gone through all these funding mechanisms. I worked in the 13th check. I worked in the revamp of schools, and we worked hard to ensure that every single school teacher gets what they deserve. Obviously, we've fallen short. We do not control the chamber currently, but we'll continue that fight. I know how the infrastructure works for schools and school allowance, but beyond that, as a runabout candidate, I work in transportation issues. I work with Texas Water Development Board for water and infrastructure issues. I work with TCEQ for environmental issues. I work with TEA with many issues across the board when we're working on that legislation for schools. So, as a candidate, I think you want to elect someone with past experience. And I think I'm one of the few candidates here today that brings that to the table. So, additional to that, I'm a local businessman here in Harlingen, like Mr. Puente, and we are in tune with the community. As he said, we like to listen to our customers and, in this case, our constituents, to hear what they want to know. You could find me here in downtown every day. I work at the post office right down the block. I have an open door policy, and I welcome any of you that has any questions to come and visit with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's give our candidates a hand. Candidates, thank you for coming to share your passion about public education with us. Let's welcome Giovanni back.
Thank you so much for attending the candidate forum. Let me just give a round of applause to Adam Cardona. I would also like to thank the Chamber of Commerce for hosting us here tonight, and for all the hard work and all the planning that went into it. Thank you so much to all the staff for all the help for doing this. And lastly, I'd like to remind everyone that early voting will happen, still going on until Friday the 25th. If you haven't voted, you can go and vote. You can visit the Cameron County website, election website, to find your closest polling place. And election day is Tuesday, March 1st. You can also go vote. Again, visit your county's election office for the closest place to do that. And again, thank you to our candidates for being here today, answer all our questions. We hope that they'll stick around for a little bit to, if you have any questions, we can just ask them directly. Thank you so much for being here.
I work my way. Right? Yeah. Like, look, everywhere you can go to, it's going to fight that crazy. Thank you. Very nice. I didn't know they had. I don't know.